All right, so get this. We're going deep on Khabib Nurmagomedov. Like, you guys wanted to learn more about this MMA legend, and we're going all in, right? I mean, 29 wins, 0 losses. It's wild.
It's remarkable, really, yeah. And the way he did it too, it's just fascinating. His style, from like a technical point of view.
Okay, so hold on. Before we get to the mauling, like, rewind back to the beginning. He was born in Dagestan, Russia.
Yeah, 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And Dagestan is huge in his story. Like, it's a republic with this, like, super strong wrestling tradition. That's where it all starts.
So it's like he was practically born, like, on the wrestling mat?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And his dad was a decorated athlete himself, like his father, Nurmagomedov. He was a coach too. And he starts training Khabib when he's 8 years old.
8 years old. Wow. I can barely remember what I was doing at 8.
Right. And it's not like casual training or anything. We're talking serious, disciplined wrestling, shaping him from like a young age.
And there's this whole story about him wrestling a bear cub too when he was like 9.
Yeah, there's a video out there somewhere. I know it sounds like unbelievable, but it really shows you the kind of environment he came from. Wrestling wasn't just a sport there. It was like part of the culture.
Okay, so how did that training, back in Dagestan, like how did that affect his fighting style later on?
Well, so many MMA fighters, they come from striking backgrounds, like boxing, kickboxing. Khabib, his base was always wrestling, and specifically this combat sport called Sambo.
Sambo. Okay, what's that?
That's a Russian martial art, right? And it combines wrestling and judo, but also striking submissions. It's known for like being super effective in real life situations. It's demanding, like physically and mentally.
So he was basically training for MMA from the beginning, like without even realizing it?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. That strong base in wrestling and Sambo, it gave him this huge advantage when he switched to MMA.
All right, so we've got like this young Khabib training intensely back in Dagestan. He's ready to take on the MMA world, right? What were those like early years like for him?
So he makes his pro debut in 2008, and he just goes off. He wins his first 4 fights in under a month. And that same year, he becomes the Atrium Cup tournament champion, defeating 3 opponents in one night.
Whoa, talk about making a statement right out of the gate. So it was obvious right away, like he was something different.
Absolutely. He had this aura of invincibility. And over the next 3 years, he just keeps winning, finishing 11 out of 12 of his opponents. He even submits Shambulat Shahalev, he went on to become a Bellator title challenger. This was Khabib's M1 global debut.
So it sounds like his opponents, they didn't really have a chance against him. So how does he end up in the UFC?
Well, his record, undefeated, and his dominant performances, it couldn't be ignored. The UFC signs him in 2011, and that's when his journey to like championship glory really starts.
Okay, so let's get into those early UFC victories. You mentioned his mauling style earlier. What does that look like in the octagon?
Okay, so imagine like just relentless pressure, moving forward, takedowns, and this suffocating ground game. He was a master of like controlling his opponents, wearing them down with his weight and grappling skills. It wasn't flashy, but it was super effective.
It almost sounds exhausting to watch, you know what I mean? Like, how do you even defend against that kind of style?
And that was the problem for a lot of his opponents. Like, they trained for months to deal with his wrestling, but once they were in the octagon with him, it was like they were caught in a web.
And you mentioned his Sambo background playing a role too.
Right. Sambo, it taught him how to like link takedowns together seamlessly, like transitioning from one grappling position to another, constantly keeping the opponent off balance. It wasn't just brute strength. It was like real technical mastery.
So it wasn't just about taking them down. It was about keeping them there too.
Exactly. He'd pin him to the mat, use his weight, the pressure to control him, and then he'd unleash his ground and pound, a mixed punches, elbows from a dominant position.
Okay, now it's starting to sound a little brutal, but wasn't there a fight where he set the UFC record for takedowns?
Oh yeah, against Abel Trujillo. He landed something like 21 takedowns in that fight. It's like a masterclass in wrestling.
21? Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Okay, so he's on this win streak, dominating opponents, and it seems like nothing can stop him. But wasn't his path to the title kind of a bumpy road?
It was. He had a few canceled bouts. Some fights were rescheduled, both because of his own injuries and his opponent's injuries. It must have been frustrating for him. He was so eager to prove himself at that championship level.
It's got to be tough, to stay focused, keep that motivation when you're dealing with like all those setbacks. But then finally in 2018, he gets his title shot, right?
Right, UFC 223. But even that fight, it was surrounded by drama. His original opponent, Tony Ferguson, had to pull out with an injury.
Oh man, not Tony Ferguson. That fight was cursed like for years. So who did they end up getting to replace him?
Max Holloway stepped up, but he was deemed medically unfit to compete because of weight-cutting issues. So they brought in Ali Quinta. But there was a problem. He missed weight.
Wait, so he couldn't even win the title? That's got to be so strange, fighting for a belt that your opponent can't even claim.
It was. But Khabib, he stayed focused, like always. He dominated the fight, won by unanimous decision, finally UFC lightweight champion.
It's like all that frustration, it just like fueled him even more.
It really seemed that way. And then, of course, there's the fight that everyone remembers. UFC 229 against Conor McGregor.
Oh man, that fight was huge. Like everyone was talking about it.
It was the biggest event in UFC history at that point. It drew a record 2.4 million pay-per-view buys. The build-up was intense trash talk, personal attacks, cultural tensions, religious tensions. It had everything.
Yeah. And the fight itself, it didn't disappoint.
It was explosive. Khabib won the first 2 rounds, controlling with his grappling. But then in the 3rd round, something happened, something unexpected.
What? He lost the round.
He did, yeah. McGregor, he managed to land some good shots, and he actually won the round. It was the first round Khabib had ever lost in his whole UFC career.
Whoa, seriously? That's wild. So was this it? Did McGregor have him figured out?
It seemed like it for a minute there, but yeah. Khabib, he showed his mental toughness. He came back in the 4th round, even more determined, and ended up submitting McGregor.
So he proved he could handle adversity and come back stronger, but then things went a little crazy, didn't they?
Yeah, the post-fight brawl. Khabib jumped out of the octagon and went after McGregor's teammate, Dylan Dennis. Both teams got involved, and it just became this whole chaotic scene.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. It was a wild ending to an already crazy night.
It definitely overshadowed the fight itself.
Mm-hmm.
And it sparked a lot of debate about, sportsmanship, the limits of trash talk. Khabib was fined, suspended for his actions.
So even though he won the fight, it felt like there were no real winners that night?
I think that's a good way to put it. But despite the controversy, Khabib continued his reign as champion. He went on to defend his title against Justin Gaethje, proving he was still the most dominant lightweight.
And then, 2020, he announces his retirement. I remember it being a really emotional moment.
It was. His father, his longtime coach, Abdul Manap, had passed away earlier that year. Khabib had made this promise to his mother that he wouldn't fight without his father there. So he decided to retire.
Wow, that's powerful. To be at the top, undefeated, and to walk away, to honor a promise to your mother, it really speaks to his character.
It does. He left the sport on his own terms. A perfect record and a legacy as one of the greatest fighters of all time.
So what happens after the retirement? Does he just disappear from the MMA world?
Not at all. He stays involved in a few different ways. First, he founds his own MMA promotion company, Eagle Fighting Championship, EFC.
That makes sense. He has so much knowledge to share, so much experience.
Right, exactly. And he also becomes a coach, a mentor to other fighters, most notably Islam Makhachev.
Oh yeah, Islam Makhachev, the current UFC lightweight champion. It's like he's passing the torch to his protege.
You could say that. He helped guide Makhachev to the top of the division, and you could see the similarities in their fighting styles.
So he's still shaping the sport, even from outside the octagon. But I remember hearing that he actually retired from all aspects of MMA for a while.
You're right. In 2023, he announced he was stepping away from everything coaching, everything to focus on family. He said he wanted to spend more time with his wife and kids.
It's another example of him putting family first. But did he really stay away for good?
He did step back from the everyday stuff, but he couldn't completely resist coming back to MMA. He's returned a corner for some close friends, family, like when Islam Makhachev had his big title defense, and his cousin Nurmagomedov when he fought in the main event.
So he's still got that fire.
He does, yeah. It seems like he's found a balance where he can be involved, but without letting it take over his whole life.
Okay, so we've talked about his fighting style, his journey to the championship, his retirement, and how he's still influencing the sport. But let's dive into his personal life a little bit. He's a devout Muslim, right?
Yes. And his faith is a central part of his life. You'll often see him wearing the papaka hat, after fights during public appearances.
Right, the papaka. It's almost become as iconic as his fighting style.
It's a symbol of his Dagestani, of our heritage, his cultural pride. He's very vocal about his beliefs, his values, which has led some interesting discussions.
Yeah, I know he's had some controversial moments, some controversial opinions. How do we navigate that aspect of his story?
It's important to acknowledge the complexities, I think, without shying away from them. Khabib has been outspoken about social issues, and some of his views have been met with criticism.
It feels like, we've only scratched the surface.
It's true. Khabib's story, it's got so many layers.
Yeah, he's like a symbol of athletic achievement,
Yeah.
cultural pride, personal values, but he also sparks these debates about things like gender roles, freedom of expression.
Right.
It's a lot.
It is.
I mean, how do you start to define his legacy? Is it just about, the wins and the championship belt?
Well, those are important for sure. I mean, he retired undefeated, holding the UFC lightweight championship. That alone puts him in the conversation for the greatest of all time.
But there's so much more to it than that, right? Like, he's inspired a whole generation of fighters, especially in Dagestan, where he's from.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's become like a role model for so many Muslims around the world, too.
He really has. He showed that it's possible to achieve greatness on this global stage, without compromising your beliefs. His dedication to his faith, his family, it's been unwavering.
But then there's that other side to it, too. His views on certain social issues. They've been controversial, haven't they?
They have.
And his association with certain political figures, it's raised some eyebrows.
And those are valid points. It reminds us that, even our heroes, they're human. They have their own flaws and complexities.
Yeah.
We can admire his athletic achievements, but also examine his viewpoints critically.
So for our listener, what's the takeaway here? How should they think about Khabib Nurmagomedov?
I think it's about appreciating the whole picture.
Yeah.
He's this phenomenal athlete, a devoted family man, a proud representative of his culture. But he's also someone who's sparked important conversations about social issues, even if we don't always agree with them.
He's a reminder that real life isn't black and white.
Yeah.
There are shades of gray.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that make us think,
Yeah.
challenge our own perspectives.
He's definitely left his mark on MMA and beyond. Even in retirement, his influence is still there.
It is.
Who knows what he'll do next? Maybe he'll get back into coaching. Maybe he'll focus on his businesses, or maybe he'll surprise us all with something totally different.
Yeah. Until then, we can look back at his career, with that sense of awe.
For sure.
And appreciate the impact he's had, positive and controversial.
Exactly. Khabib Nurmagomedov. He's a name that'll be remembered, not just for his dominance in the octagon, but for the way he's challenged us to think about how sports, culture, and personal beliefs, how they all intersect.
So to our listener, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep into the complexity of the world around you. There's always more to learn, more to discover.